Amsterdam, 1680. A craftsman writes to his brother in Utrecht. He describes the neighborhood where he works, the Herengracht, the grandest canal in the most prosperous city in the world. He describes the tall, narrow houses lining the water, and then he writes that he will never own one. He is a skilled carpenter, earning a reasonable wage, yet these houses were built by the merchant class, for the merchant class. They were designed to be bought, sold, and speculated upon, not to provide shelter for the people who built them. When was this letter written? 1680, 345 years ago. Snap to 2025. The Netherlands is facing a housing shortage of 450,000 homes, larger than the post-war deficit. In Amsterdam, a typical monthly mortgage now sits between 1,500 and 2,000 euros. For most young-ers in the city today, those canal houses are as unattainable as they were in the 17th century. Host 1. This chart compares the ratio of house prices to annual wages. At the peak of the Golden Age boom in 1664, a house on the Herengracht cost a skilled craftsman between 40 and 50 years of wages. Today, the ratio for a young earner in the same city has returned to that exact same level. Host 2. We often talk about the housing crisis as a modern failure. Host 1. The data suggests the opposite. The system is functioning exactly as it was engineered 400 years ago. To understand why this is happening, we have to look at the 17th century. The Dutch established the legal and financial mechanisms that define the modern property market. Host 2. They actually invented the market? Host 1. They formalized the instruments. When the Amsterdam Stock Exchange opened in 1602, property was already being traded alongside spices and grain. They pioneered the mortgage as a financial instrument, lending against property as collateral so people could buy homes they couldn't afford in cash. They applied futures contracts to property, trading rights to buildings before they were even built. Most importantly, they formalized land as an investment asset, a place to store wealth that appreciates over time. Even the physical shape of the city was a financial calculation. The government taxed houses by the width of their canal frontage. Owners responded by building as narrow and tall as possible to minimize their tax bills. The result was the first real housing bubble. Between 1629 and 1645, house prices in Amsterdam, adjusted for inflation, increased by 180% in 16 years. Host 2. And while merchants treated the Herengracht as a portfolio, the working class moved to the Jordaan. It was built as a district for laborers and craftsmen, separated from the Grand Canals by design. Today, that workers' ghetto is one of the most expensive postcodes in the country. A one-bedroom apartment in the Jordaan regularly sells for over 750,000 euros. The mechanics of the market prioritize the growth of the asset over the need for shelter. That feedback loop was fully established 4 centuries ago. We can track this tension through a dataset called the Herengracht Index. Because the Dutch were meticulous record keepers, researchers were able to compile every transaction on this one street going back to 1628. They have house prices going back that far? Every single one. This chart shows the real inflation-adjusted value of Herengracht property over 380 years. Over the very long term, prices actually held steady, but the path was defined by massive booms and devastating crashes. You can see the peaks in the 1660s and 1730s, followed by crashes that wiped out decades of gains. Now look at the far right. Since 2012, Amsterdam prices have nearly doubled. They are currently 13.5% above the previous peak in 2022. This chart suggests that when prices deviate this far from the baseline, a severe correction follows. Historically, those corrections have never been gentle. However, there was one moment when the Netherlands broke this cycle. After the Second World War, the country faced a shortage of 300,000 homes. The private market had proven for centuries that it could not house ordinary people at prices they could afford. The government responded by building hundreds of thousands of social housing units, woningcorporaties. By the 1970s, nearly 40% of all Dutch homes were social housing, making the country genuinely affordable for a full generation of working people. They actually solved it. They built their way out by overriding the market baseline. So the crisis isn't an inevitable law of nature. It's a choice of how to manage the system. that changed in the 1980s. The government began dismantling the social housing model, withdrawing public investment, and pushing more households into the private market. They prioritized the market's role as a wealth generator over its role as a provider of shelter. Then they forgot again. By 2025, the shortage has grown to 450,000 homes, larger than the deficit after the war. This led to a blunt headline in Dutch news: Dutch homes are unaffordable because that's what officials want. The government has the tools to reduce prices, but the barrier is the political will to prioritize people who need homes over people who already own them. That is not a new problem. It is 400 years old.